Before, after. Before, after. Fresh pressed apple cider. Wow. Today has sucked so far. This day has just been weird since I got up, didn't sleep well, and lots of problems. And I'm kind of realizing as I'm working that wood shops are a lot like airplanes. You don't want to work them when you're tired and when your mind is elsewhere, because accidents happen and they are never good. Nothing bad has happened yet today, but that's just been on my mind. The fact that I'm working with all these sharp blades and tight tolerances, and all it takes is one slip. But nothing bad's happened yet. Hopefully the ridiculousness is behind us and we can focus on the project for today. Today's project is building door and drawer fronts for our cabinet set. I want to kind of go through a lot of the troubleshooting that I did last night in more of a synopsis fashion. I'll just tell you, it took several hours to come to a conclusion on how we're going to build these, but let's kind of back up for just a second. In case you're just joining us, you just happened to stumble upon this video in the series, we've been working on these cabinets. They are for the laundry kitchenette in our house, which is in our garage. And it's the first set of cabinets I've ever built. So if you haven't seen those earlier videos, jump back. We start with sheet goods and a cut sheet plan, work through all that stuff, building the boxes, pocket hole joinery. We also built the drawers and we installed those rails and everything to get that done. So this part took many days. And then yesterday we actually built these face frames, and these are going to go on the front of these boxes, and that's what you will actually see. The carcass will actually be hidden behind those face frames, which that's the quickest synopsis I can get you up to today. So imagine this face frame goes on this cabinet thusly, and the drawers will have a front on them, and of course this cabinet only has drawers, and we'll also be building the doors. So first, before we get into all the ridiculousness of troubleshooting how to build them, I just want to say I've been doing a lot of this from my cut sheets, and this is the one thing that I think I really failed myself on with my cut sheets. I did not draw these doors and drawer fronts out all the way. I basically drew them out as a solid and then figured I'll deal with it down the road. Well, I proved to myself that when you don't do that level of planning, you create a cluster. So I spent probably 2 hours last night going through my drawing and working through the measurements in my cut sheet and verifying everything, and lo and behold, I found these yellow spots are actually mistakes that I made because things had changed in the project. So I'm glad I spent this time, because I would have been very irritated had I built all these doors and drawers and they don't fit, right? That would have sucked. I'm going to try to go at this fairly slowly. That way we make sure we're not building stuff that's going to end up in the bonfire. Okay, so that was more of a confession than anything, but this project for me has been one of those where there's kind of a sub-theme. The sub-theme is planning everything down to the nubbin. That way there's not a lot of thinking once you start building, versus the whole like wing it. What are you planning so much for? Let's just get stuff done, right? Start cutting and then realize, oh crud, that doesn't fit, or we need more, or we wasted a bunch, or we wasted a bunch of time. We're still gonna have those moments because we're owner builders and all this stuff is new to us, but I'm trying to kind of learn how does that benefit you when you spend what seems like a lot of time on the planning phase versus just jump straight to making things. Which, by the way, it seems like a lot of people on YouTube don't have the patience for planning. I kind of figured that because we shared a couple of planning videos, and while there was a good response, the general response was shut up and start building. So I guess this is our house, we'll build it how we want. These are our videos, we'll make them how we want. So we're trying to share more of the planning, and we're trying to also show the back end of that, how does it work out for us. And I think this is a great example of not planning enough, and now I'm making mistakes. Okay, so on to how to build these drawers. So the single drawer fronts, which are the small ones here on the top row, these are only a 5-inch drawer front. So there's no value in making those into a panel. We're gonna make those out of a single solid piece of prefer. But these lower drawers, and of course all the doors, are quite large, and making those out of a single large piece of wood would be difficult. The wood probably wouldn't be as stable, and it would be a lot of work, I guess. All that to say, I think what's more common in the cabinet industry is to build what's called a panel door or a panel drawer, and that's what we're gonna do. So we started kind of laying these out last night. These are 1 1/4 inch frames that we would use to build the drawer front. So if you can kind of just imagine, this is a box, here's the panel, and we were gonna do a dado joint. Let me see if I can find one of those. So there's a dado, but it's like a very boogered dado because we were screwing around with a bunch of different designs. So this will be dadoed into the frame, and it will be kept inside the frame that way with glue. So that's kind of what the frame will look like, something like that, except that'll be hidden. And that seems like really simple, right? So we have 3 different ways that we could build these that require some sort of like doohickey to make it work. The first one is what's called a biscuit or a biscuit joint. And you guessed it, it involves these little biscuits. They kind of look like little footballs. We have 2 ways to make those joints. The Shopsmith, which has a biscuit joiner attachment, which we have, and then we have a standalone biscuit attachment, or standalone biscuit joiner from DeWalt. The problem is that those biscuits, the way they go into the piece of wood, you wouldn't be able to do that with 1 1/4 inch frames. So use your imagination a little bit here, so I don't have to dig out all this stuff and show you. But this little biscuit, what you would do is you would actually put a groove in this piece of wood here that's somewhere about that location. And then this biscuit slides inside that groove, and it would stick out about halfway, like that. And then you would put a groove on this side, and you would glue all that and then clamp it, and that biscuit is actually what holds those 2 pieces of wood together, although obviously it would be more in the center of this piece of wood. But you can see that this biscuit sticks out, and that is the smallest biscuit that we have, and it just doesn't seem like a good way to do this joint for us. So just as quick as we thought about it, we also scrapped using biscuits. Now, you're gonna find out later that we jumped to a 2-inch frame. So had we used a 2-inch frame in the beginning, maybe we would have, I don't know. Because you can see that a 2-inch frame, if you had 2 inches here and 2 inches here, I think you have enough to do the biscuit joint and it would make sense. But let's just pretend like we're not gonna use that, okay? We didn't go to the nth degree validating the biscuit joint because we thought early on it wouldn't work. But I guess in my mind, I'm also concerned that if you don't get the biscuit joint in the right spot, your doors aren't gonna be right. I think my point with this is if we're gonna biscuit joint, we need to practice biscuit jointing some other time on some other project, not on this project, not right now, not on these doors. All right, that brings me to the second method that we have to fasten these together, and it's a dowel jig. We actually have this jig that's really similar to a Craig jig, but it's designed exclusively to use dowel pins. And we set this jig up, and we drilled a few holes, and then we started kind of doing some test fitting. So basically drill these pieces, you put the peg in there, or the dowel, and then you fit everything together. And I can tell you that getting this to fit nicely was actually pretty difficult. That doesn't look that bad on the camera until I turn it and you realize there's actually a pretty big ledge there. Now, can that be sanded out? Yes. Do we have time and energy to do that? Not really. We could, but we think there's a better way to do this. So we pretty quickly used this dowel jig, saw the inconsistencies, and just said, let's look elsewhere. And then that brought us full circle to the Craig jig pocket hole joinery. So this is the method that we've been using so far for just about everything. We use it to assemble the drawers, the cabinet carcasses, and the face frames. And here I think we're going to end up using this for the doors and drawer fronts also. The reason is that we can double clamp this. So we can clamp this way to hold this whole joint very, very tight. And then we actually have a clamp that we can use this direction and hold this joint tight, so that when we drive the pocket hole screws, you end up with a very flat, very true, very tight joint. And at first it didn't seem like this was going to work because the 1 1/4 inch stock, you can see how close those holes are together. Now imagine that we run a dado joint in there. It's going to eat up some of that wood. We solved that problem by putting 2-inch door stock. By moving up to wider stock, we're not going to have that problem. But let me tell you why we all of a sudden changed our mind from 1.25 to 2-inch. I got to thinking about the hinge that we're going to be using for these doors, and I had forgotten to measure the dimension of this cup. This cup actually gets drilled into the door so that this sits flush, so that you would see something like that. We're gonna have to drill a hole. We have a jig for that. So the question is, how big is this cup? And the answer is more than 1.25 inches. So if we're gonna be using this for the doors, we cannot have 1.25 inch frame. So just that quickly, I realized that the deciding factor was this hinge cup. So we decided to move up to a 2-inch frame. The 2-inch frame solved a bunch of problems. It made it so that we have less plywood for the panels. We have more room for the pocket hole screws. The dado joint's not going to interfere. And I think overall the door is going to work a lot better, especially with a well-fastened hinge. So another thing about these panel doors. This plywood that I'm showing here is actually the same wood that we use to build our drawer stock and for the cabinet backs. We actually have a little bit of this stuff left over. We looked at a local hardware store for 1/4-inch A grade or some sort of face grade birch ply finished plywood. The stuff they had in stock was sold as ACX plywood. One face is A grade, the other face is C strips, CX meaning strips, and then they do some stuff to it to make it look like it's not strips. It was very poorly done, CX, and the A grade was full of plugs. Now, that might meet code, but it's not going to satisfy us for the doors that we want to build. So what I did was when I got home, I started researching and running the numbers on the panels that we need for the cabinets. And lo and behold, we actually have enough leftover 1/2-inch plywood that has this beautiful hardwood face to do the cabinets. So it solves two problems. One, I don't have to put fugly plywood on my cabinets, and two, it gets rid of a bunch of waste that we have left over from the previous project. So sounds to me like that's a winner. In case you guys missed it, I guess I should mention this just because it's something we're really proud of. This wood is literally left over from the timber frame that we used to build our house. So are those face frames. It feels amazing to be turning this wood into something beautiful in our house. We did turn a lot of it into firewood. If we would have had more time, certainly we could have made more usable lumber, but time was not our friend at the time. So it's nice to be able to use some of this thinner wood. These were just like 1.25 inch rough sawn boards. We put them through the joiner, the planer, and aren't they beautiful? Well, a lot of the hard work has been done getting this rough lumber dimensioned. So now I want to focus on getting everything crosscut, and we'll use the Crosscut Sled like we did on the face frames. That worked really good. I've never had a Crosscut Sled in my life, and I feel like once it's calibrated and you kind of use a stop on it, it's really easy to get really good crosscuts. And of course we can use the dust collection on the Shopsmith, so that works out good. And then we can shift gears and start working on the dados and then get all the panels cut. So that's kind of what we need to do. Crosscut, dado, and panels. I guess before I jump into that, let me explain one thing. We did this on the face frames. We basically took a board like this that's got, you know, open knots on it. If you try to cut that, it's gonna blow out. I'm surprised it didn't blow out in the planer or the joiner. What we're gonna be doing is looking in here for clear wood like this. And we're going to be cutting around these knots. Even though we're going to go paint probably on these, it still is going to make the appearance a lot nicer. I guess if you wanted it to be knotty, you know, you'd want to leave all that stuff in. We're going after more of a smooth, consistent look, something like this piece here, and we'll cut around big hollow knots like that. To make this work, I've oversawn the amount of lumber that I need. We need 61 feet, and there's 81 feet here. So hopefully somewhere within this, there's less than 20 feet of waste, and we'll get all the pieces that we need. Well, there's one sample of what a drawer front's gonna look like. Today has been a lot of work. I feel like this stuff is probably deceptively simple when we edit it in a video, but I've been just very patiently going through this stuff. There's a lot of pieces and there's a lot of chances to screw up. My brain is gonna be frazzled until we test fit all this stuff. So I feel good about what we've got going here. It looks right. The only problem is we need to run all these pieces through the joiner. So all this stuff is overcut or oversawn by a 1/16 of an inch. And that's so that we can make sure. It's a lot easier to do this, in my opinion, when you get smaller boards. It's a lot more work, but they're easier to manage. And when you get to this size and you put this board on your joiner, you can really make sure that you've got a good square relationship there. And so when you run it through the edger, you're getting a really good edge. But if you've got a long board and it's trying to go up or do weird things, it just gets harder and harder and harder. So we just put an edge on it early on to run it through the table saw. And then we flatten it just enough to run it through the planer. And those are kind of initial steps. Now we're to the fine-tuning stage where we want to see how many passes through the edger it takes to get it to the exact dimension that we're looking for. And I don't think we're going to get to the dados tonight. It's just too late. I'm too tired. It's a whole and changeover on the Shopsmith, and that's something we really want to take our time to get right. So I think what I'll do is I'll probably finish up tonight getting the edging done on all these pieces and get them down to dimension. And then basically all the material is done. Then it's a matter of dadoing, which I thought we'd get done today, and then starting to sand and assemble. I feel like it wouldn't be a bad idea to sand and assemble one door and or one drawer or whatever. Maybe even paint it and test to see if we really like it. I think we're pretty committed to the paint thing. So if you've been following along, we've been wishy-washy. I think we're gonna go ahead and do it. It seems like a tragedy to paint such a beautiful piece of wood, but I think when it's all done, the timelessness of it will be pretty obvious, and forbid the day ever comes we have to sell this house. Somebody else can like it, or they can paint it their own color.